of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. Senator, thanks for joining us. First of all, just your response to this remarkable op-ed from Vladimir Putin that doesn't seem to be exactly on message with what I thought was being agreed to.
Well, Jake, I got an email with what President Putin had to say, and I have to be honest, it was at dinner, and I almost wanted to vomit. The reality is I worry when someone who came up to the KGB tells us what is in our national interest and what is not. And, it really raises the questions of how serious this Russian proposal is.
And that's what I wonder is, with this as a scene setter, I mean, it's not quite the message, the subtle message that Anthony Weiner gave to the members of the press on his last limo ride away from, but it's pretty close. Taking issue with American exceptionalism, saying it was the rebels, when he's already saying that he's going to help take CW away from the Assad regime. It's kind of in your face.
Well, it's very much in your face. And, when I see Putin's other comment that suggests, well, you can't expect a country to unilaterally disarm, we're not talking about unilateral disarmament. We're talking about chemical weapons. So if he believes that in the arsenal that Syria or any country should have is chemical weapons that they can use, my God, that's a real problem. That's not unilateral disarmament by any stretch of the imagination.
Chairman, you just said that it raises questions about how serious the Russia proposal is. John Kerry is on a plane right now going to try to talk to his counterpart from Russia. Is he on a fool's errand?
No, look, I believe, as someone who helped author the resolution that got a bipartisan support in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that it would be foolish to slam the door on a potential diplomacy. We have to test it. But all of the indicators from Russia beginning to back off of a Security Council resolution, which is the only confirming way that we'll know whether this is serious, to this latest op-ed piece, to the suggestion that unilateral disarmament means ability to use chemical weapons, that's a real serious consequence to the validity of this offer and the sincerity of it. But look, we have to test it. And I think we have to test it both for at home and abroad.
But so is the Security Council resolution, can I nail you down on that? A Security Council resolution is what you must agree to, because the Russians in the past have agreed to have Iran abandon their nuclear weapons and then backed off of that. The Russians also agreed to a similar proposal to allow nuclear enrichment in their country for Iran and then backed off of that as well, wouldn't include teeth. So if they agree to this and then Syria balks, how should the rest of the world enforce it?
Well, that's why a Security Council resolution is critical in order to achieve what we would hope could happen. Look, a potential result of this could be far more positive. We were ready to strike to stop Assad's abilities to have weapons that deliver chemical weapons. If you can eliminate the chemical weapons, that's a greater desirable result, but it has to be real. And look, the only reason, I believe, that the only reason that the Russians are even maneuvering in this way and considering the possibility is because of the credible use of force. If that was not there, we would neither hear Russia making any offer, nor would we hear the Syrians contemplating such.
Senator, what do you think is going on in the Kremlin? Here they are.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, but your guess is probably better than mine. So let me ask you, what's going on? I mean, they get together and say, well, let's write this op-ed for the New York Times and play to public opinion, which is against President Obama, and divide America even more. I mean, what's the thinking here?
Yeah, Gloria, I think there are two things going on here. First of all, I think the Russians did see the contemplated possibility of strikes against Assad, and that would have weakened him, even though our purpose was to pursue the delivery mechanisms for chemical weapons. It would have degraded Assad significantly. It could have, by consequence, created a change.
But I mean with this op-ed.
On the battlefield. That's why I think they began to move in this direction. He's trying to maximize his leverage. He's trying to get the American people to ultimately be further divided, and in doing so have a stronger leverage point through his foreign minister in these negotiations. But I think the American people, when they read that, will reject it wholeheartedly. He may have an opposite result as a result of his
Says he has the Pope on his side.
Well, I am sure that the Holy Father has moved Putin at various other times.
I want to get your response to some of the things, some of the claims he makes, because you have information that we, as people who haven't seen the classified intelligence, have, and the public as well, it doesn't have. Putin writes, when talking about the poison gas and who's responsible, quote, "No one doubts that poison gas was used in Syria, but there is every reason to believe that it was used not by the Syrian army, but by opposition forces to provoke intervention by their powerful foreign patrons who would be siding with the fundamentalists. Reports that militants are preparing another attack, this time against Israel, cannot be ignored." Now, you've seen the classified intelligence. Does he have any case to make there?
No. Look, only in Russia and Putin's parallel alternate universe could you believe that. Let's add the facts up for a moment. The facts are these, that there's no question that the delivery system of the chemical weapons were through missiles. If the rebels had missiles, they'd be striking at his artillery and his aircraft. They don't have missiles, number one. Number two, all of our satellite intelligence shows that the delivery of those missiles came from areas controlled by Assad into the rebel areas. We also know that Assad's regime, as it relates to chemical weapons, are fully vetted for loyalty to the regime and under its absolute control. And we know basically that access to chemical weapons does not exist at this point in time among the rebels. So if you add up all of those facts, you can clearly understand that Putin's position is out of the realm of believability.
But Senator, you just talked about Putin's parallel alternate universe. Mm-hmm. It's his universe, and we're living in it right now. I mean, isn't that the reality that we are and that's part of what he was trying to say in his op-ed. You know, he's running the show right now. And so, but as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, do you feel comfortable with the fact that we are living in his parallel alternate universe?
Yeah, when I say his parallel alternate universe, look, this is a guy who grew from the KGB to be the head of it. And he is still, from my perspective, still very dominated in his mind by KGB and the desires for a greater Russia. So that's what I mean by his parallel alternate universe. He's very conniving. He's very calculating. At the end of the day, I think the world, however, needs to see that challenge. Many of my colleagues who are ambivalent about the declaration of the use of force want to see a diplomatic track to be pursued, and this is an opportunity to do that.
He has all the leverage right now, doesn't he? He supplied all those weapons to Assad that you're talking about. For 30 years he's been supplying those weapons. Why do we think he'd be motivated to get him to turn them over?
Well, I think that there is a clear understanding, and this is why the credible use of military force needs to continue to be on the table.
When
because
was it on
that
the table,
only
sir?
changed.
Well,
it came on the table.
table.
Let me finish the first answer, and then I'll go to the second. It's 4-on-1 here.
Sorry.
But I agree.
But are
with
you
this.
having Yes, you did.
Let me finish the first answer, and that is he came to a conclusion strategically that there was a real possibility. Remember what the president said. The president said, "I have made the decision that the use of force is necessary, but I'm going to go to the Congress." He has not yet abdicated the possibility of the use of force under any set of circumstances. That's a real prominent possibility. So in that respect, he looks at the issues of Syria's interest. This is the only foothold they have in the Middle East. He's lost enormous support within the Middle East because of his position as a patron of Syria. And to be very honest with you, as he sees Syria eroding, even as they try to keep Assad in power, this is never going to be a country, from my perspective, where Assad's going to control the whole country. So the access to those chemical weapons, potentially at risk, may be in Russia's interest as well to make sure they're secured again.
Hasn't he just stuck his thumb in John Kerry's eye, one in John Kerry's eye and one in President Obama's eye with this?
That's two thumbs.
He's two thumbs
just
with
fact
this
check.
piece. Thank you. We have instant fact check at this table. Hasn't he done that with this op-ed and kind of stop things before they even start?
Look, I think they are going to try to maximize their position as John Kerry goes into his discussions with Lavrov and create the maximum ability to get the result that they want. Now,
is that a yes or a no?
That's on Well, it means that they're going to maximize their position. And if maximizing their position is taking efforts to try to divide the American public and try to undermine the very efforts so that the Americans are in a weakened position, but I don't think he'll achieve that. It's very clear that we're going to insist on a verifiable process with a UN resolution, otherwise we have nothing.
All right.